Welcome to this channel, which is a class on research methods by Dr. Lydia Wabugu. This is a class where we discuss everything social science research, from understanding the research discipline, research philosophy, the elements of scientific research, and the methodologies of conducting research. Feel free to ask any question regarding today's lesson on the comment section. Welcome.
Welcome to our lesson today, where we shall discuss qualitative research. Remember, in lesson 10, we discussed the two main research approaches in social science research. We discussed two main approaches, that was basic versus applied approach, and we also discussed quantitative versus qualitative approach. In lesson 12, we discussed quantitative designs. We said that there are three main quantitative designs, and the three are survey, which can either be correlational, it can also be cross-sectional, or it can be longitudinal. We also discussed ex post facto design, which we said it is an after the fact design. We also discussed experimental designs, and we said there are two main experimental designs, and the two are true experimental and quasi experimental. The difference between the two is randomization. In true experimental, we are able to randomly select and randomly assign the group to be in the experimental and the control group. Whereas in quasi-experimental, there is no randomization. In lesson 13 and 14, we dealt more on experimental design, where we discussed in details the experimental procedures and threats to validity of experimental designs. In today's lesson, we will first discuss qualitative research as an approach before moving to discuss qualitative research approaches or designs, which we shall discuss in our next lesson. So before we look at qualitative design, let us first look at the learning outcomes of this lesson. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to, 1, discuss the characteristics of qualitative research, 2, identify situations that may call for a qualitative research, 3, explain methods of determining trustworthiness in qualitative research, 4, explain the types of triangulation, and 5, identify the steps that you follow when conducting qualitative research. So let's move together as we look at qualitative design, qualitative research, and characteristics of qualitative research. As a way of introducing qualitative research, we need to ask ourselves, what does qualitative mean? In simplest term, qualitative means that it is something you cannot quantify. In other words, it is something that cannot be converted into numbers or numerical terms. And that is why qualitative research is defined as a systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of data in order to provide in-depth description and accounts of social events and objects of research in their natural settings. Now, we have underlined in-depth description in their natural setting because those are key characteristics in qualitative research, and we shall discuss them when we get to characteristics of qualitative research. As you remember, when we discussed quantitative approach, we said quantitative approach collects numerical. In other words, variables can be converted into numbers, but qualitative collects narrative data. In other words, qualitative research is investigative, or it is exploratory in nature, aimed at observing human habits and behavior in their natural setting. So there is no controlled environment in qualitative research, but the researcher goes to where the phenomena is and tries to get the meaning of the phenomena or the meaning of the research concerning a particular phenomena. So data in qualitative research is in form of texts, it is in form of materials and photographs, it is in form of words, it is in form of observations and not numbers. And this type of data describes the events and occurrences of the phenomena when it is in its natural setting. So a qualitative researcher tries to make sense of or interpret phenomena in terms of the meanings people bring to them. Let us look at the characteristics. So the first one is natural setting. This is key in qualitative research. So whereas a quantitative researcher collects data from a controlled environment, not necessarily where the phenomena is, in qualitative, the researcher engages directly by talking to the participants and observing how they behave within their context, within their environment. And because of that, the researcher is the key instrument. In qualitative research, it is the researcher who is the main instrument, and he examines documents, he observes behavior, he interviews participants. So other instruments, for instance, interview guide, document analysis guide, focus group discussion guide, which are highly unstructured, only come to assist the researcher to probe further the participants in qualitative research. The other characteristic is the issue of triangulation. We are going to discuss this more in this lesson, but as a way of introducing triangulation means use of multiple sources of data collection. So in this case, a qualitative researcher does not rely on one method of data collection. They use observation, they use interview, they use document reviews. So the qualitative researcher then reviews all this data, making sense of it, organizing it into categories or themes that cut across all the data sources. The other characteristic is inductive reasoning. This is a bottom-up type of reasoning. The researcher builds patterns, categories, and themes from particular to general. So he or she discusses or observes a case or a phenomena in its natural setting in depth, and then builds the case in a bottom-up inductive reasoning method. Another characteristic is in-depth investigation of phenomena. Qualitative research is used when a researcher is interested in describing a phenomena in depth. Reporting, another characteristic. In qualitative research, the report is written persuasively and with a personal voice I. This means that the final qualitative report includes the voices of participants and the reflexivity of the researcher. Data presentation. So we have previously said that data in qualitative is in form of narratives, participants' voices in form of excerpts, pictures, audio forms, and videos. And this data comes from a small sample, which is information rich. And we shall discuss this more when we look at sampling. Another characteristic is emergent design. In quantitative research, the research plan is prescribed before the study. The researcher in a quantitative states the problem, states the objectives of the study, the research questions, the hypothesis that will be tested before the study. But in qualitative, the design is emergent. This means that the initial plan for research cannot be tightly prescribed. All phases of the qualitative process may change or shift after the researcher enters the field and begins to collect data. For example, you may find the research question changing when the researcher starts collecting data. Again, you may find the individual studied and the sites visited may be modified during the process of conducting the study. Another characteristic is holistic. Remember we said quantitative researchers who emerged from positivist paradigm tries to break the social issue into constructs and variables. But a qualitative researcher does not break the social issue into variables. He tries to develop a complex picture of the problem or the issue under study. And that is why qualitative researchers look at a social issue from multiple perspectives of the participants and then sketches the larger picture that emerges out of that issue under study. Finally, is participants' meaning. So in the entire qualitative research process, the researcher keeps a focus on learning the meaning that the participants hold about the problem or about the issue, not the meaning that the researcher brings to the research or writers from literature. The interest of the researcher is the meaning as they are constructed by the participants regarding a particular problem or a particular phenomena. So now we move to our learning outcome number 2. When we use qualitative research, we use qualitative research when an issue needs to be explored in depth, when we need a complex and detailed understanding of the phenomena, when we need to empower individuals to share their stories and hear their voices, when we want to corroborate quantitative data, and when we want to develop theories and principles. Outcome number 3, how do we ensure trustworthiness in qualitative research? The first thing we need to ask ourselves, why are we talking about trustworthiness in qualitative research? Remember, we said the researcher is the key instrument in a qualitative research. Therefore, the report that is written is normally as a result of the interaction of the researcher and the phenomena in its natural setting. So how can we be sure that the report that has been written is trustworthy? Positivists normally questions the trustworthiness of qualitative research. And why do they question? Because the concepts of validity and reliability cannot be addressed in the same way in a naturalistic work. So this has driven many qualitative researchers to use different terminologies to distance themselves from the positivist paradigm. And one such person is Buber. And he proposes 4 criteria that have been adopted by many qualitative researchers in pursuit of trustworthiness of a qualitative research. And the 4 are credibility, which in quantitative is referred to as validity. Then we have transferability, which is similar to generalizability in quantitative. Then we have dependability, which is similar to reliability in quantitative research, and confirmability, which is similar to objectivity in quantitative research. So let's discuss each of these 4 criteria. We start with credibility. So credibility asks, how congruent are the findings with reality? In other words, how sure are we that the findings we have in a qualitative research emanated from the phenomena? And this is similar to validity in quantitative research. Can we believe in these findings? So, from the perspective of credibility, we are saying that the purpose of qualitative research is to describe or understand the phenomena of interest from the participants' eyes. Therefore, participants are the only ones who can legitimately judge the credibility of the results. The second criteria is transferability. This is similar to generalization in quantitative research. So transferability asks, what is the extent to which the findings of this qualitative research can be applied to other situations? So in positivism, the concern is normally how far, how applicable are the findings to the wider population. Remember, in qualitative, we use a small number of participants. Therefore, how can we demonstrate that the findings and conclusions can be applied to other situations and population? So we can do this through thick description as we write our report. The other criteria is dependability. Dependability is similar to reliability in quantitative research. The question we are asking ourselves is, if the work were repeated in the same context, with the same methods, and with the same participants, would similar results be obtained? The idea of dependability in qualitative emphasizes the need for the researcher to account for the ever-changing context within which the research occurs. It is the responsibility of the researcher to describe the changes that occur in the setting and how these changes affected the way the researcher approached the study. Finally, is confirmability. This is comparable to objectivity in quantitative research. Confirmability is a measure of how well the inquiry's findings are supported by the data collected. It refers to the degree to which the qualitative results can be confirmed or corroborated by others. Remember, qualitative researchers tend to assume that each researcher brings a unique perspective to the study. Therefore, steps must be taken to ensure that as far as possible, the findings are the result of the experiences and ideas of the informants rather than the characteristics and preferences of the researcher. We now look at the concept of triangulation. Triangulation involves using multiple data sources in an investigation to produce understanding. Qualitative researchers generally use triangulation to ensure that an account is rich, robust, comprehensive, and well developed. So using multiple methods as you conduct qualitative research helps to facilitate deeper understanding of the phenomena. There are mainly 4 types of triangulation. The first one is called methods triangulation. This is where you use multiple research designs. And we are going to discuss this at the mixed method research. The second type is triangulation of sources. This involves examining the consistency of different data sources from within the same method. The other one is analyst triangulation. This is using multiple analysts to review findings or observers. In other words, analyst triangulation means using multiple observers and analysts to review the findings of the study. Finally is theory or perspective triangulation. So this is using multiple theoretical perspectives to examine a phenomena and interpret data. Finally, we look at the steps or the process of conducting qualitative research. One thing you need to be clear is that the steps involved in qualitative are not as distinct as they are in quantitative. They often overlap and are sometimes even conducted concurrently. However, we will discuss the steps that are followed as you conduct qualitative research. The first one is identification of the phenomenon to be studied. So definitely before you start any study, the researcher must identify the particular phenomenon he or she is interested in investigating. The second one is identification of the participants in the study. The sampling in qualitative is mainly purposive. So in this step, the researcher is identifying who will participate in the study and then purposively samples the participants who are information rich. Number 3 is generalization of hypotheses. Contrary to quantitative research, hypotheses in qualitative are not posed at the beginning of the study by the research. Instead, they emerge from the data as the study progresses. Some are almost immediately discarded, others are modified or replaced, and new ones are formulated. Step number 4 is data collection. Mainly, the data collection methods are interviewing, document analysis, and observation. 5 is data analysis. Mainly the data analysis in qualitative is inductive, where we rely heavily on the meanings that have been brought about by the participants so that we can describe the phenomena in depth. And once we have analyzed data, the last process is drawing conclusions. So in qualitative, research conclusions are drawn continually throughout the course of the study. So whereas in quantitative researchers, they usually leave the drawing of the conclusions to the very end of the research, qualitative researchers tend to formulate conclusions and their interpretations as the study goes along. And with that, we have come to the end of our lesson today. Today we have discussed qualitative research. We started by defining what is qualitative research. We have discussed characteristics in depth. We have discussed when to conduct qualitative research, methods of determining trustworthiness in qualitative research, the concept of triangulation and types of triangulation, and finally the steps that are followed when conducting qualitative research. Our next lesson will look at qualitative research design. So thank you for being part of this class. Please subscribe to this channel so that you can attend more lessons like we had today. Feel free to comment, like, and share this video with your friends. Until the next lesson, where we shall be discussing qualitative research designs. Thank you and bye for now.